So we have questions on the absolute conjugate strategy, or a question. Do you want to go ahead and
Well, I'm sure there might be more questions, but the first question. So we recently just posted a video on why we have an absolute conjugate strategy, where we discussed the conjugate strategy. So the first question from that video is from Teeman Cohen's. Hopefully, I'm saying that right. Lately, I'm experimenting with not sticking onto the original 3 week wave where you keep the same weekly cycle for 3 weeks in a row, but varying the training days over a total of 3 weeks. Not quite sure if I'm clear, but in the original 3 week wave, you keep the same sequence of training days on a weekly basis, but you could also look at a 3 week wave like a total of 21 days and make a sequence that is not exactly the same for every week. You're programming for 21 days then instead of for 7 days times 3 weeks. You could still evaluate weekly and make weekly adaptations, but because you want to train absolute strength, speed strength, joint function, and reactive strength all together, you have a lot more options if you don't hold on to a strict weekly sequence that is exactly the same every week. What do you guys think about that?
so there's actually a lot of questions into that. This is a great topic. You want me to kind of start with that?
Sure, yeah, definitely.
Okay, so essentially what he's saying for people that don't have a background in conjugate, right? Like obviously the conjugate originated in the Soviet Union and Russia, and then essentially Louis Simmons adapted it for the sport of powerlifting here, and part of that adaptation is a 3 week. Is when he's saying the same weekly cycle for 3 weeks, that 3 week cycle is very specific in talking about training for absolute strength. Okay, so the reason why I'm trying to give context is because you got to understand that when you start to discuss this 3 week wave, that's something that is a concept that came out of the Soviet Union that then Louis Simmons then installed in his West Side Conjugate system, and that's specifically for absolute strength, where you're going to do a 3 weeks, you're going to do train at a stimulating intensity for that for 3 weeks, right? And then you're going to do a 1 week deload. And some more background on that, right, is, Alesky, who was like I probably announced his name, right? But the Soviet lifter that we have it on a resource guide. He was on the cover of Sports Illustrated.
Hmm.
Okay. Essentially, he figured out early on that he couldn't really push the nervous system for 3 weeks in a row. Okay. And that was something that, according to Louis, he found out kind of the same way. So he didn't have that information until then he interacted with Mel Sif, and Mel Sif said, well, the Soviets said the same thing. You can really only use the max effort method for 3 weeks in a row, and then you got to do a deload. Okay. So the 3 weeks in a row is for only one of the ecologies that we have. Okay. And if you
Which is
actually
absolute strength.
which is absolute strength, right? And then obviously we have our own definition of special strengths, which is different than the Soviets, different than West Side barbells. And on top of that, we also have the concept of a neurological network. And when you understand the concept of neurological network, a lot of these old paradigms that kind of existed and populated and once again, absolute strength sport of Olympic weightlifting, absolute strength sport of powerlifting, those paradigms aren't going to have to transfer over to point B. Okay. Right. We also, I don't want to get too much into the weeds, right? Because that's why we have a learning module. But we've also extended max effort outside, like we run max effort in the clinic as well.
Hmm.
Okay. And that's something that you're not going to run into neurological stagnation in a clinical setting. Like it's going to take a lot for you to do that. But
Hmm.
anyway, I'm getting way too far off. There's too many topics because there's a lot of content in here. So I'm just trying to give people like where this 3 week came from. Okay.
Sure.
So how we think about this is if we have a very specific case where the individual has a suboptimally trained neural net, we have to now train at a stimulating intensity for absolute strength. And if we're going to do that, we have to do that externally in the weight room. And in order to do that, we may adhere to the 3 week wave, but we may not. Okay. All right. Think about it. Like when we're training all of this stuff in conjugation, and if you have an untrained nervous system, man, yeah, you could deload if you want, but you may be hitting some serious momentum where every time you're going in there, based off of our definition of what a training max is, they're hitting training maxes and training maxes and training maxes. And you know what? Maybe we're going to extend that out for 4, 5, 6 weeks. Realistically, how we have to do it is we deal with athletes that actually have a season. So
Hmm.
so think about it. If you got an offensive lineman, you got a limited time frame. So like, yeah, I would love to take a deload week, and I would love for them to only have to scale up the neurology. But I don't have that. Okay,
Sure.
so listen,